Well, hello everybody again, and welcome back to a video. This morning I'm going to clean my Volt bikes. We've not looked at the Volt bikes recently, and I thought, you know, it's a good morning. I was going to clean them up. I've been out in quite a little bit of wet, damp weather over the last couple of weeks, and they've picked up quite a bit of grit, which I wanted to clean off. I do try and keep the bikes as clean and maintained as best I can. I'm no expert on bike maintenance. As I've said in other videos, I've had bikes all my life, so it's basically, you know, if you look after a bike, it's always there and it's usable when you want it, with just a little bit of basic maintenance. So we'll have a look at that as well later on. One quick point is, you know, I sometimes will take the battery off the bike and wash the bike down. I don't like putting a lot of water on these electric bikes at the best of times. One little tip I would say is don't use any kind of commercial like washing up liquid. A lot of that washing up liquid does contain sodium or salt, which obviously it's a thickening agent that has been used in washing up liquids. So always use a car type shampoo if you want to, or just clear water basically will often get the dirt off. I'm not a fan of going as far as pressure washing these electric bikes, even if you get them really dirty. I think, you know, just a little bit of, say, basic car washing shampoo and a little brush, and that's quite sufficient very often to get the build up of it's the grit and the dirt, you know, you want to get off. So yeah, we'll start by taking the panniers off and removing the battery, and take it from there onwards, and as I give it a wash down. This is the oldest Volt of my Volt pulses, of the two pulses I have. This is just the Volt pulse, and as I say, this I believe I'm telling you right, I believe this will be coming up 5 years old in October, so it's like 4.5 years old as now. And so yeah, we will start by, say, removing the panniers and take it from there. So it's quite easy on this bike just to, these panniers on here that I've got fitted on these relatively cheap panniers on this one, they're getting quite old. They just hook off, and then they have like a bungee clip that hooks over onto the bottom of the rack there, so they just hook up, and then there's a bungee clip that so I shall have to now find the key for the battery. Obviously the battery locks at the bottom, so we'll go and see if we can locate the battery key. I have now found the battery key, and obviously that goes into there and then just turns. And one thing you always want to remember, and you'll see why this key is bent, is when you've done that, is pull the key out. Otherwise, if you pull the battery up with a key in, it hits this point here, and it's very easy, as you can see, to do what I've done, bend the key. So always, once you've done that, remove the battery key. Obviously then we've got to drop the saddle off and turn that round, and then basically this one has lost its handle. The battery just slides out like that, and be careful because they're quite heavy, these batteries. And we lay that down there, and that's the battery then removed. You can see there's quite a bit of dirt and grit that gets into that plate, which we will clean off. So now I shall carry on and just wash the bike as normal, basically. So we've given the Volt a good wash down now. As I say, without using too much water. I don't like to use too much water. It's just, as I say, to get the any grit, dust, and dirt that accumulates. Sometimes, if, for instance, these smaller cogs on the gear system, if they're very got a lot of grit, I'll put a little bit of degreasing fluid in a jug and just sort of get in there and clean as much as that. You often find these little cogs that get really clogged up. They pick the grit up. I cycle on a lot of cycle paths, and they're quite loose, kind of one of them in particular is quite a loose, gritty surface, and I find if you get, if the wheel's lubed up as it should be, or I've also found things like WD-40, if you spray that on, which there again is a great lubricant, but it can attract a lot of grit to then stick to these little cogs. So you occasionally, not every time, you want to just clean. I like just to clean these off. I think it must help extend the life of probably the mechanism, and perhaps the chain. I've had a new chain on. I've worn a chain out on this particular Volt. I've fitted a new chain to this bike already, and it's as a 4.5 year life. So yeah, I'm sure it must help, as I say, to get in there and degrease this. As you can see, it's running extremely black, and it's taken a lot of the old oil and a lot of the grit. And there's another, you can see that up there, there's another small, we just move the jug over a little bit, there's another small cog there which I like to get in and sort of degrease that as much as possible. And then obviously with the stand down it's a little bit difficult. I shall have to let go of the camera. We'll then. So having now washed the bike down and degreased the worst of the gearing cogs there, what lubricant do I use on my Volt? Well, I will use WD-40. It's quite a good, all-purpose lubrication system. As I do find that can be quite sticky, as all lubricants. Doesn't really matter, So I use it quite sparingly, and obviously it's quite good in the winter. I think if you're riding on the roads in salt and such like, and probably a bit wetter conditions, I think then it's worth probably spraying your chain and your gear cogs and that kind of thing. But what I normally use is just a normal, very light household oil. This is made by Wilco, and it's just called their Handy Oil, and I find that fine. I just sort of just run a little bit along the chain like that, and any points, like the bearings on the pedals, I'll put a little drop there, and any moving points, the front kind of bearings on the front wheel, and also on the gearing system down there, just a little bit. You don't need a lot, I find, and I will go and then obviously later wipe that off. If we come around this side of the bike, I like to put a little bit in there and then slope the bike back so it runs in, and there again the pedal there, sort of thing, just a wee little bit there. You can see that's nice, it runs nice and smooth. little bit around anything like this that moves, the stand, just the slightest little bit there, as I say. And do be careful with the brakes, the disc brake. Don't get any oil on that, obviously, for obvious reasons, and I sometimes clean that down with a brake cleaner. I haven't done that this time, but the front and the rear, you know, like disc, metal discs are, you know, and obviously they have pads. They have pads in there, and obviously don't put any lubrication in there neither. We'll have a look in another video about how easy it is to change these discs. I sometimes do put a little drop of oil on this mechanism there because that's a moving part, and likewise on any of your you know, any moving parts really, as I say, that require this, and so it's just the slightest bit of lubrication, and as I like to wipe it off with a cloth. Particularly the cables, as I say, that's always a good thing. They can get seized up if you're not using the bike, and it's just general, really, you know, I suppose commonsensical things, really, you know. As I say, they do go better, obviously, you know, cycles, like all things, if you keep them, you know, looked after and lubricated, you know. I think it's little and often. Is my thoughts on that. You know, don't flood it, or as I say, if you do, you know, like I've just done there, as I say, what I like to do then is come and just sort of wipe that off with a rag, any oil that I've spilt anywhere, and just give it a wipe off, and that's fine. I'll now put the panniers back on, and then we'll look at putting the battery back in. I do in the winter occasionally just rub a little bit of Vaseline on this plate. Obviously it's summer now, and I'm not going to do it. In fact, there still is a little bit on these contacts. I just think it sometimes helps. You do get a lot of grit and dirt, and there again, often more in the winter time, you're cycling through damp conditions, and I find that just helps. Just smear a little bit of Vaseline on those and on those contacts. It's never done any harm, and I think it's probably helped over the period. When you come to reinstall or refit the battery, you have to be quite careful on this. I'm going to try and do it one-handed, which is not the easiest of things. Obviously you line it up like so to go in the groove, and then the thing to do is to be careful as you slide it down not to let it drop onto this lower plate, which is very thin. It's held in with these 4 Phillips screws, and that plate is very thin, and if you let the battery go quickly down, which is easy to do sometimes, you can crack this bottom plate. I've done it, so you know, that's something to bear in mind. You know, just steadily let the battery go down there, and then you simply just lock the battery back in place, and that's the battery back fitted. And it's as simple as that. It's very, very easy to take the you know, batteries off the Volt bikes. Obviously then I've got to reset the saddle from my position, because obviously we've moved that. You have to move. That's the one disadvantage, but it is a little bit of a security measure. You have to remove the saddle to remove the battery, but I don't mind that. You know, it's on a quick. The saddle's on a quick release system, and it's not difficult. So we'll do that, and then have a look at tyre pressures. So re-tyre pressures on this. This is a Volt Pulse. On the rim of the tyre, it does say inflate between, I think it's 40 to 60 psi, and I must be honest, I normally have these tyres inflated to around about 45 psi. That seems to suit me. I might go a little bit higher than that. It seems to give a reasonable ride on most conditions. As I say, I ride a lot on the road and on some what I'd call as quite rough cycle tracks, call them what you like, and you can actually see, I don't know whether you'll see that, but it's quite down. It's quite, they could, I thought they could do with some air in. So as I say, we'll pump it up a little bit. So there we go. I don't know whether you'll see that, how well this will register, but I'm just on the 40 psi mark there, and the tyre is nice and hard. It's not over hard. I find I have tried them at various times of the year at 50 psi, and I do find that under certain conditions, then mainly on roads, there is a tendency when you brake for the tyre to slip a bit, and it's, to me, that they seem much happier at this 40 psi mark. So that's where I just keep them, just a slight touch over the 40 mark there, and that works extremely well for me, and it gives you a good ride. And the tyres seem to last incredibly well. As I say, if we have a look at this front tyre here, this is the original tyre that's coming up for 4.5 years. It will be 5 years. There's a little bit of bulging in places, and but there's no crack. The rim hasn't cracked at all. Quite remarkable, as I say, the mileage that has done. And I'm just looking at that, and yes, on there it does say 40. I think on there it says 40 to 65 psi, and that's an original tyre that came with it. But as I say, just over the 40 mark for me seems to give a really good ride. And as I say, also, when you look at the tyres, they seem to have lasted very well. So there we go. I think you'll have to agree that the bikes look so much better for a good clean, and this one still cleans up amazingly, and as I say, certainly does not look its age by any means. I think this is coming up in October for 5 years that I've had this, and the many miles it's done, it cleans up wonderfully well. And as I say, I can't fault them really. As I say, I've replaced the 2 clips, put 2 plastic cable tie clips in to hold the cables up, which were missing, and I've had a good look round it, and as like I said, lubricated all round now, and give it a final wipe over with a duster, and it looks brilliant, and it's well worth doing this. So thanks ever so much for watching, and please do subscribe, and I hope to get out and do 1 or 2 more rides over the summer on the Volt bikes, and look out for those if that's of interest to you. And thanks again for watching, and please come back for more videos very soon, and bye for now.